Hello and welcome to the Peluso Presents podcast for the week of July 1st, 2024. My name is Mike Peluso. I am your host. This is episode number 248, and the title of this week's episode and the title of our post of the week is Why Pittsboro? Now, this week's episode is all about a situation that happened that I've experienced maybe twice in my life. And what I mean by that is sometimes there is a conflict between people, and sometimes that conflict doesn't just cause two people to stop being friends. It causes two families, two groups that were very intertwined to stop being friends. And that was the genesis of this story. We had a disagreement. Simply stated, I set an appropriate boundary, and a friend of mine who felt very, very entitled to cross that boundary got into a conflict. And the conflict ruined the relationship, not just between me and the friend, but between my family and their family. And so it was kind of a big mess because our kids, who didn't really know what was going on, were wondering why these friends who were like family members were not coming around anymore. And we kind of pushed it off and said, oh, well, they've got their own life, they're kind of busy, et cetera, when in reality, we waited until they were older to say, hey, listen, we had this massive conflict and this is what happened. I did it with my older son first and then my daughter later. But the point of it is years went by and then all of a sudden, one of these people who we were super close to moves to our town after major conflict in their lives beyond the conflict between us and them. It was definitely a them thing. Their life was in chaos. There was an existential crisis going on, etc. But the point was they got divorced and they moved to our town, and I couldn't stop getting it out of my head. Why here? Why Pittsboro? You had the whole world. Why Pittsboro? And that evolved into, I think, a pretty good article that explores the idea that when we have options, we should really consider our options and not just take the easy route when we make big changes. So you can hear more of this story, although I think I sanitized it pretty well within the article. And you can make up your own decision as to if it was a good idea to move here or not when you listen to our post of the week.
Post of the week.
Why Pittsboro? I had a friend. Had is the key word. He was my best friend. He lived about 30 minutes away, and we'd still hang out every weekend, drink beer, and muse about the universe as people who drink often do when they are together. Over the years, something changed. My friend, who was going through some things at home, started to demand more and more of me. At first, I gave in to their wishes, but over time, I started to resent my buddy. I was still hanging out on the weekends. By that point, it was mostly out of habit and the fact that I honestly didn't have much else to do. Then, one day they pushed me too far and I drew a healthy boundary. My friend, who felt entitled to cross that boundary, and I had a big blowout. It was the kind where things were never the same again. I heard through the grapevine that things weren't going so well for my buddy, and ultimately he wound up going through a divorce. Like all people who go through a divorce, he had to rebuild his life. A year later, I got a text from my buddy. It was a very brief exchange, but ultimately it informed me that he moved to my small hometown and he planned to be cordial when we invariably bump into each other, and he expected the same of me. Pittsboro is a great town. It's quirky. It's the county seat for a county that's half ultra-progressive center for the arts and half ultra-traditional farming community. The little downtown has old-time diners, country antique shops, and half a dozen breweries and bars. My friend, who has a quirky personality, matches this town, so it wasn't entirely shocking they chose to relocate here. That being said, I still couldn't figure out why they picked Pittsboro versus all the other options. The first option they had was to stay in their hometown, a large suburb of Raleigh where my friend, who is a big-time extrovert, has a large network of close personal friends. Many people would choose to stick close to their support structure. Additionally, the former spouse moved away, so it's not like my buddy was going to see his ex-wife. I know from past experience, it's a pain to have to drive a half hour every weekend to see your friends or to get together for dinner during the week. Also, if you wanted a change, this Raleigh suburb is so dense, you could move 2 miles away and it'd feel like a whole new community. Staying in their hometown made sense. Now, like I said, my friend is quirky. If they wanted to change, they could have done tons of things that fit their personality. One thing to keep in mind is that my former best friend has a skill set that can be utilized anywhere in the world. That means there are virtually unlimited international options. International makes sense. Another important point is that my former friend just went through a divorce from a long-term marriage where there were considerable marital assets. My guess is my former friend had anywhere from $150K to $250K cash just sitting in a bank account. That is an amazing nest egg that can be used to build a completely different life anywhere in the world. I thought of some crazy international options right off the top of my head. My friend could have moved to some Mediterranean Mecca like Santorini and worked in the tourist trade. They would absolutely love European island culture. Also, knowing my friend's snarky nature, they could have rented one of the traditional Santorini round-roofed homes and would have loved telling anyone and everyone they live in a boob house. On that note, they could have moved to Ireland. My friend is a huge drinker and likes cold weather. I could see them becoming an expert in every pub in Ireland, not just on the beers, but also on the ones where you'll probably see the best bar fights, some of which I'm sure my friend would have had a part in starting. My ex-buddy could have moved to Sydney and watched the surfers all day. I could see him either enjoying surfing himself or just getting a job where he could watch the bikini-clad female surfers all day. The bottom line is that my former friend's options are unlimited. California, Alaska, van life, anything that you can imagine, they could have done. That is why I can't see why they chose to be shackled to this area. If it were me, I'm thinking Mexico or somewhere else in the Caribbean. I would try to find a little beachfront bar and sell drinks on the beach. That's me. But the point is, if my life of nearly a quarter century blew up and I had the money and skills to go anywhere, I'd be considering everywhere. So why not do the big move? There were a few reasons. I think one of them was the big lie. In this case, I can see my old friends saying they wanted to stay close to their child. The problem with that argument is that the child is an adult. A young adult, but an adult. Also, the child lives over an hour away. Like most adults, they are living their own life. The child has a significant other and all sorts of demands on their own time. It's to the point where my friend has complained that they never see their child. I can see the desire for a close relationship, but it doesn't exist and most likely won't for a long time until the adult child decides to settle down and start a family, if that ever happens. Also, the adult child can simply travel wherever my friend wound up. I think another big reason is fear of the unknown. Like the big lie, this one is another false reason. We live in the information age. Over time, and with planning, all the major unknowns are mostly known. You could learn anything about any of the destinations in the world. It's all there. Additionally, with just a little bit of cash, you could do exploratory trips. Also, by the very nature of going through a divorce after a long-term marriage, you have overcome fear of the unknown. And that's the point of this whole story. The question about having to start over and the best way to do it. By all accounts, my buddy isn't doing anything other than living their old life, only without the challenges of their spouse. A spouse who, for the record, did exactly what I'm suggesting here. They are in a new relationship, and even though they have stayed relatively local, they have started a whole new lifestyle that's about as far from suburban Raleigh as you can get. So why didn't my former buddy do it? Or perhaps more importantly, what could they have done to start a new life? For an educated person, my friend, unlike their former spouse, didn't dare to dream big. Their ex dreamed very big and has achieved a massive lifestyle change. My former friend simply dreamed a life without my spouse, and that's what they got. I'll pat myself on the back here and say one of the things my old buddy lost when they shut me out was the little voice that, unlike all the other friends, would have said, "Okay, and then what?" throughout the divorce process. I would have asked that question over and over in many different ways. I would have brought up all the places they could move. I would have pushed my friend to consider their longer-term options and plans. I would have filled in the role of the former spouse in this regard. After a few decades of someone else making the big plans and having the big ideas, I guess my old friend wasn't in the habit of it. Maybe since they got married so young, they never did learn how to have a strategic vision for their life. I know I would have got them thinking about their future plans beyond divorce. The takeaway from all this, beyond the obvious, when relocating, try not to move to a town where you have to ask people to be cordial to you, is that if you're going to make a change, make sure you understand exactly why and what it entails, and then make the most of it. If I were a betting man, I'm going to say that all the emotional displeasure with their former married life will rear its head again. Mostly because I don't think the core issue was his marriage. Remember, we were best friends. I knew the guy as well as anyone. I think the malaise he was feeling about his marriage was actually more related to an existential crisis. He wasn't a career climber, so after the child was out of the house, he didn't have a reason for his existence. Without a reason to exist, you don't have goals. If you don't have goals, then developing a strategic plan is impossible. At this point, all the big changes in your life are just window dressing. They look good, but really amount to nothing. If we were still buddies these days, I'd be asking them, but what do you want to do for the rest of your life? Again and again in many different ways until it sunk in. I'd point out when their words don't match their actions. Something that my buddy was notorious for. I think eventually I'd be able to nudge them a bit more quickly to whatever is really next for them. But we aren't close anymore, and I don't think a quick "how you doing" or a cordial nod at the downtown diner is going to help them in any way. Still, whether they know it or not, they are continuing to help me with my life. They've taught me that if I'm going to make a big change in my life, I damn sure better know why I really want to do it, and then when I pull the trigger, I better make the most of it. Life is too short for anything else. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Peluso Presents podcast. You can follow the Peluso Presents efforts via Twitter @Peluso Presents, on Facebook, on Medium.com, just search for Mike Peluso, on LinkedIn, and of course on the blog located at www.pelusopresents.com. You can email us directly via peluso@outlook.com. This podcast is available on all major podcast services, including iTunes, Google Play Music, or your podcast service of choice. We love and appreciate any comments and reviews you wish to leave. Please remember to support this effort by sharing and liking the postings on all your social media. If you'd like to support this effort more directly, you can via patreon.com/Peluso Presents. Thank you for listening, following, sharing, and for your support. We appreciate it.